Hey everyone, I'm Will. This is Jay. We're from Tesco, the UK's biggest supermarket, where our team's built a distributed API gateway with Envoy. And we've come here today to talk about what we found difficult about rate limiting with quotas and what we ended up doing instead. So this is roughly what we've got. We've got our own control plane, which takes in bespoke config from around 800 Tesco APIs, translates that into XDS and pushes it down to our envoys, which are running across multiple regions. And depending on that config for each API, it might be exposed out to clients in the public internet, users doing their shopping on mobile apps, etc. Maybe to Tesco's internal services on the private network, or maybe into our stores where we've got around 100,000 checkouts and other devices calling into these central services. So especially because we've got essentially what could be a botnet if we're not careful running in stores, rate limiting is a super important feature for our teams. So they can configure how many requests they'll let through to their service to protect it from being overwhelmed. Also so that they can protect one client from another client and a noisy neighbor type problem. We wanted this rate limiting to be global, but also to be really fast, not to suffer from too much overhead that it would add to response times. So we were really interested in RLQS. Very briefly, what this is a protocol in Envoy where each envoy will report what it's seeing about usage for certain types of requests, certain buckets up to a central server. That central server will make some decision about how to allocate quotas down to each envoy. And then those envoys can then set about enforcing that quota locally very, very fast with no need for a remote call or anything like that. So this sounded great, but things got a bit more difficult for us when we started to think about, in reality, how dynamic our traffic really is, how dynamic usage is across our different instances, and therefore how dynamic our quotas need to be. So a couple of examples of where we might see traffic shifting: a rolling deployment. Envoys get drained, traffic gets moved on to new envoys as they spring up, and on we go. We run multiple copies of our full stack per region, multiple cells, so that in certain types of deployment, our pipelines will drain traffic off a cell, do some maybe destructive change, switch traffic back on, and that's great for us, very convenient, but it does mean a lot of traffic shifting around. Or even for a stable set of connections, load just organically moves around. Connections get closed to some envoys and open to others, taking a whole load of traffic with them. Or even for a fixed set of connections, you might just see the distribution of certain buckets moving around. So why is this a problem? There's inevitably some lag between usage changing, that usage being reported up to the central server, that server then redistributing quotas to allow for this change in distribution. And you might see different things during this lag time. You might be absolutely fine. If there's enough overhead in each envoy between current usage and the quota, you're still well within it if the usage change is small. But for bigger changes in usage, or if you're very close to your quota already, some envoys will start rejecting requests. They are false positives, even though globally we're within the limits that this team's configured. Some envoys are rejecting some proportion of their request during this lag time. We don't want that. So in some contexts, or in most contexts, some level of false positives is absolutely fine. You can't expect perfect systems. But with what we projected and the fact that this false positives here would have a direct impact on our end users, we didn't want to just accept it. We could have invested in reducing this lag time, so reducing how long it takes for a usage change to then reflect in a quota change. But that gets harder and harder the further you go with it. It gets very expensive. And ultimately, you're limited just by physical distance between many regions. So we thought about, can we make our system a bit more tolerant to lags in quota change? We thought about, could we extend Envoy somehow to account for this? For example, temporarily to burst above the quota it has. But as well as being potentially complex for us, would we even be able to tune this? if we're not tolerant enough, we still have false positives to deal with. If we're too tolerant, our rate limiting solution is just ineffective. We routinely let through too much traffic. So in the end, we decided to move away from quotas and to do something else instead, which Jay is now going to explain.
Cool. Thanks, Will. So to overcome these false positives, we realized we needed a more global approach to rate limiting. So rather than adopting the RLQS approach, where we are calculating an individual quota for each envoy, we adopted a percentage-based approach. So we're now no longer calculating an individual rate limit for each envoy. Instead, we aggregate all of the usage reports and inform the envoys of the percentage of requests that it needs to allow through. And that percentage is the same for all envoys. So it now no longer matters how traffic is shifting between our cells and our envoys. Each envoy is simply given the same percentage of total traffic to allow through. And as that total traffic changes, all of the envoys adjust together by the same proportion. So it's no longer about a fixed quota per envoy. It's about each envoy allowing a certain proportion of the overall rate that it's receiving. This keeps everything balanced and in line with the rate limits that we have configured. So in the happy case, where our traffic volumes are within our configured rate limits for a bucket, the percentage that we allow through is 100%. And even if the traffic is shifting, that percentage stays the same across all envoys. And in the case where we need to rate limit some requests, so let's say, for example, our traffic volumes are double what we have set in our configured rate limit, we now simply tell every envoy to only allow through 50% of the traffic it's receiving. So there are no fixed quotas for the envoys. Each envoy just proportionally allows through 50% of the traffic that it's receiving, regardless of the volume it's receiving. So this solves the traffic shifting problem and the false positives that Will mentioned previously, because even as traffic shifts, every envoy only needs to continue to allow 50% of their traffic through. And there is now no delay in an envoy having to wait for the rate limiting server to calculate a new quota for it and send it down to it if it starts receiving a higher volume of traffic, which was the problem that we were previously experiencing. However, this presented another challenge because the RLQS protocol does not support percentage-based values. So we built our own custom protocol to communicate those percentage values to the envoys. To do this, we adopted the sidecar pattern, and this allows us to integrate our protocol with the existing Envoy rate limit service. And the sidecar simply translates our new protocol to Envoy RLS, but it also acts as the gatekeeper on whether to allow or deny a request that the Envoy is receiving. The sidecar is physically very close to the envoy as well, for example, in the same pod. So that decision on whether to allow or deny a request can be calculated and transmitted very quickly back to the envoy. And the sidecar architecture also future-proofs our system, because if in the future we decide to update or adapt our protocol, we can make those changes without having to change the underlying core Envoy service. It also had the added benefit of reducing data volumes through our system, because now we're no longer calculating an individual quota per envoy. Instead, we're calculating one system-wide percentage, which we give to every envoy, overall reducing those data volumes. And the results speak for themselves. So as you can see from the graph, we have a large spike in the middle, which shows successfully denied requests. But the important part are the flat lines either side, which shows that there was 0 false positives. All the while, our traffic was shifting between our cells and our envoys. So we are now able to successfully shift traffic across our ecosystem between our envoys with no incorrectly rejected requests. So overall, rate limiting with quotas is hard, so we didn't. And instead, this percentage-based approach allows high volumes of traffic to move across Tesco's envoys successfully. Thank you for listening to our talk. We hope you found it useful, and please feel free to find us after this if you have any more questions or want to find out more. Thank you.